Well, National Student Financial Aid Scheme chairperson Sizwe Nxasana has confirmed that he's resigned from the organisation. However, he's refused to provide any further comment. In a statement, Nxasana says he informed Higher Education Minister Naledi Pandor of his resignation from NSFAS on Monday, where he offered his support to ensure an orderly handover process. NSFAS has come under fire after Pandor instructed the scheme to halt funding for the 2019 year students because of a backlog in dispersing aid for 2017 and this year. Nxasana says in a statement that since December 2016, the institution's mandate and funding obligations have increased exponentially.
Well, following up on that story, he's an activist and he's a corporate man, so he'll be able to help us try to understand what really happened here. Khaya Sithole, thank you so much for making the time. An annual budget of 30 billion rand. When Sizwe Nxasana says he's leaving because of the extreme strain on the payment system, what does he mean when he has so much in the kitty?
Look, that 30 billion rand is actually probably insufficient to meet the needs of what NSFAS really ought to do. But I do think that what we've seen is that from the moment he was appointed in 2015, he wanted to direct NSFAS to do things in a particular way. He came in when NSFAS already had problems, and of course, he had a particular vision of how he wanted it to operate. But of course, this would have worked out in his way had there not been an interruption to the way things were working when Jacob Zuma, as he was president back then, decided that NSFAS actually had to do things a bit differently. They had to really change their mandate. So I do think that, of course, there was then this disruption where he then had a particular vision, and this vision now had to be aligned with something that the government then decided to adopt, and I'm not sure that alignment was ever achieved.
So for him to now leave at a time when Minister Pandor says she's trying to clear the backlog, does this speak to the problem with that announcement you're talking about made by former President Jacob Zuma, or does it speak to the inability to come to terms between the minister and the chairperson?
I get the impression that essentially when you talk about the backlogs from 2017 and 2018, NSFAS has always had legacy problems in that it struggled to process the nature of the applications that it had. It struggled to sort of get that interaction with the students to be in the way that NSFAS wanted it. Historically, this interaction used to happen at the university level. And one of the key things that NSFAS has been involved in the past couple of years is really removing the universities as a conduit and having direct interaction with the students. Because of course, if you have a direct interaction with the student, you sort of can monitor what they do without having to rely on universities feeding you that particular information. And that is the one cause that Nxasana would have championed, which is to say, look, let us have direct interactions with the people who are the beneficiaries of the scheme. Now, of course, what then happened is that when you then say that, look, actually the mandate should be something that is slightly different to what you signed up for in 2015, it was then a question of could NSFAS essentially turn around its systems and its processes and really its vision to then move in with what the President of the Republic, as he was back then, decided needed to be done. And I suspect that if you look at an organization that is that big, and if you look at the number of students that essentially have to be filtered and vetted before NSFAS decides who it is that they need to sort of be interacting with, probably the timelines that he was given were insufficient. Let us be fair, the announcement was only made at the end of December. And of course, NSFAS would have had to have a long lead time in order for it to be able to say, look, this is how we can actually roll out this particular program. But of course, there were political pressures that required that this free higher education model had to be rolled out immediately. And I suspect that NSFAS quite simply just didn't have the institutional capacity to do that. And of course, he being the figurehead of NSFAS would have said to the government that perhaps we should try to roll it out in a particular way. But the government responds to different political pressures, which is to say ahead of 2019, you cannot have a system where everybody says that NSFAS is still not working. And of course, for him to be trapped in that fiasco between the politics and the reality of what happens on the ground probably became an untenable situation.
But Khaya, he came in as a highly regarded chairperson who would be able to navigate both the political and the corporate space and be able to handle the administration side as well. What went wrong?
I suspect that if you look at the 55 million citizens that exist in the country, he is still, in my opinion, the one person who probably had the best chance of actually turning NSFAS around. He is highly competent at what he does. But of course, what you really want to be able to understand is, do the politics understand the operations? And when the politics supersede the operations, it does create a paralysis, because he is not a political accountability person. He is not a political leader. So he is responsible for the operations and for the strategy of NSFAS. And really what you wanted to see is that there had to be a very good alignment between the minister and the chairperson so that they all speak from the same hymn sheet. What you saw recently is that obviously the political pressures that came to play led to the minister saying, look, I've told NSFAS to stop processing, and it sent out the wrong message. It sort of really gave the impression that she was unhappy with the way that NSFAS was doing things. And as I always keep reminding politicians, there is a lot of PR capital to be gained in having the two people sit together and say, we've reached a consensus and this is what needed to be done. So for the minister to unilaterally say, no, I've told them to stop, without taking us into her confidence, explaining exactly what the background conversations would have been, it really then meant that people looked at him and said, oh, well, if the minister says the system is not working, you are the figurehead, so do the explanation.
Did he have any space left to navigate in terms of engaging the minister?
No, I still think he does have a lot of capacity to navigate and sort of really say, I still think this is the best way to go. But of course, when you then look at what the political climate in the country is, we've got a general election coming up. He can have very good interactions with the minister and say to her, this is what I think needs to be done. But of course, the minister then is accountable to an NEC that says, are we on board? Are we going to ensure that there are no student protests at the end of the year? Are we going to ensure that other political parties cannot attack us on the basis that NSFAS is not operating optimally? And of course, that's a political conversation that is not a Sizwe Nxasana conversation. So if the minister then has to make a call and say, look, the political conversation is what I'm accountable for, that's what she's going to go for. And I still think that Nxasana leaving NSFAS leaves a huge vacuum. I mean, very few people have the institutional knowledge that he possesses on how funding works, primarily on how banking works, on how interactions with clients work. So now we have to wait and see who steps up and actually says they can replace him.
He's also said that he will be available to give advice in terms of the structuring and the organization of things going forward. But how much space does the minister have in terms of what she can do with what Sizwe Nxasana has left behind?
The bigger problem, of course, is that now we have this anxiety in the system because there are over 400,000 students that are in the pipeline. There are millions more that are probably looking at applying into the NSFAS system. So for now, for us to end up in a model where the minister has said, hold on your applications and not give us an alternative date, it creates anxiety. So I think that we should not forget that there are students out there, particularly those who haven't even received allowances this year, who are now wondering what on earth is going to happen. But I do think that when he says that he's willing to facilitate a handover, that is the type of person that he is. He's not going to cripple the system. He's going to assist whoever decides to take this over. But in that process, then it's going to be a person who then has to look into what already Sizwe has done before and then say, how do I take it forward and how do I align it with the political forces of the day? Because unfortunately, the space is far too political and most of us would like to acknowledge.
Just finally, when the announcement on free education was made in December, it was only time was going to tell what the implications were going to be. And this is one of them. What else will we see coming up in terms of, or as a result of that announcement in December?
Look, at the end of the day, this was always supposed to be a phased-in process because we have to be responsible and understand what exactly it takes to roll out a model of this nature. When you've got 26 universities and 50 FET colleges, you need to ensure that the institutions themselves are already in a position to then say, this is how we deal with it. Now, of course, the vacuum that was created is that NSFAS was directly interacting with students. So I, as a student, might get an SMS that says I've been funded, but the university doesn't know that yet. So then when I get to the university and I say I've been given money,
there's so much to talk about, but unfortunately we have to leave it right here.